welcome back to another week. And this week we are in Matthew 12, and we're going to break this first section, part 1, from verses 1 through verse 14. There's a little bit to cover in this little section, so we'll get started. At that time, Jesus went through the green fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple desecrate the day, and yet are innocent? I tell you that one greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Okay, so we're going to look at some background to get some information here. But first of all, let's look at Deuteronomy 23, verse 25. And this goes back to eating grains of the grains. Let's see, 23, verse 25. I'll start in 24. "If you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but you do not put any in your basket. If you enter your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to his standing grain." Okay, so that's what Jesus and his disciples are doing. They're walking through, and this is on the Sabbath, so they weren't allowed to, according to the laws, they weren't allowed to walk more than a half a mile. And so maybe it was too far to get food. Whatever the case is, they were getting food from just gathering it off of the grain heads there that's growing. Now, the thing with that too is that they were what the Pharisees would be saying is, well, you had to grind it up in your hands to eat it. Well, either whether they were doing that or not, if they were just popping it in their mouth and chewing it, I've had grain like that, and that's how I used to eat it. So it depends on what they're doing, how far the Pharisees were taking it. But the point is, they were obviously trying to pick on Jesus, trying to figure out a way to trap him. But they weren't harvesting. That would be the work. They were just eating the grain. The other thing is, this story that he's referring to, that Jesus refers to, is in 1 Samuel 21:6. So let's take a look at that to also get a context. 1 Samuel 21, verse 6. "So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away." Okay, so David and his men have gone into this area, and they are hungry, just like Jesus and his disciples. They're hungry, and there's no food. The priests, they can't give them any other food, so the only food that's left is the bread. But this is old bread. It's not the fresh baked bread that's going into the tabernacle, into the temple. This is, or to the tabernacle, because the temple hasn't been built yet. But so this is old bread, and that's the only bread that was going to be thrown out. So this is the only bread that he had, and so he gives it. It would be comparable to, say you're having communion at church, and you finish communion, everyone's finished, and they're getting ready to put all the communion stuff away, but there's a homeless person outside the doors, and you want to give them food because they're hungry, but you don't have any food anywhere in the church. The only food you have is the communion wafers. Would you turn away the homeless person just because they can't touch the wafers? It's holy, you can't use it. No, that's what Jesus is saying. If you have somebody who's in need, you take care of the need. So the bread of the presence that is being talked about here it's replaced every week, and the old loaves are eaten by the priest. The loaves given to David were these old loaves that was just being replaced with fresh ones. As we mentioned, although the priests were the only ones allowed to eat this bread, God does not punish David because his need for food was more important than the priestly regulations. So Jesus is saying, if you condemn me, you are also going to have to condemn David, because he was doing the same thing. And of course, the religious leaders aren't going to do that. It would cause a great uproar amongst the people. Um, so that's kind of where the context is going on here when he's talking about David and this particular event that took place. But then he also goes into talking about, what about the priests who desecrate the temple? Well, the Levites are having to do work. Their ministry is to have sacrifices, but they're doing work on the Sabbath for the sake of the people. So what Jesus is saying, yet they're innocent. So he desires compassion for those in distress and not animal sacrifice. That's the point of it. And also, okay, let's look at Mark 2 to 27. Mark 2 to 27. Let's see. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So Sabbath is made for the people, not vice versa. One of the other translations is basically puts it into this phrase is, the Sabbath is committed into your hands, not you into its hands. So the Sabbath is a time for us to worship God, to rest in his presence, to worship him, to put him first above everything. Well, is it to glorify God? Yes. Was healing somebody that he heals this man on Sabbath, was it to glorify God? Yes. It's not glorifying rules, it's to glorify God. And the healing glorified God. So the Sabbath is not to be a burden to the people. It's supposed to take the burden off. It's supposed to, let's take a break from work so you can get your priorities, get everything aligned back up right. Take a breather so that way you can go into the new week fresh. That's the point of it. And you're putting your focus on God, making sure that everything is back in alignment and nothing's off, because let's face it, when we work, it's easy for us to get weary, and then our focus gets off, our priorities get off, and it's just a time, oh, okay, I get back in line. And that's what we do on Sabbath. Now there's also obviously discussions about Sabbath being Saturday or Sunday. It doesn't really matter that much. It's just a matter of making sure that you make one day out of your week to be holy and set apart for the Lord, and you keep that set apart for him. Now it's interesting too that the man does not come to Jesus. The Pharisees actually point him out. So they are looking to trap Jesus. And they have no heart of mercy for those that are hurting, which is exactly what Jesus points out here and says, if you have a sheep that's fallen into a ditch, what are you going to do? Just leave it there? Let it die? No, you're going to go and actually help the sheep out. It goes back to our passage from a couple of chapters ago. If a sparrow falls to the ground, are you not much more worth sparrows? Well, Jesus is saying a person is far more worth than a sheep. If a person needs to be shown mercy, then you're going to show mercy. You're not going to just leave them in the ditch to die. You're going to actually get up and help them. So that is what the reference is here. And Jesus doesn't go against the commandment of the Sabbath at all here. He's going against their interpretation of it. The Sabbath is important. Also, he doesn't do work to go and heal the man. He speaks to his hand. He says, hold out your hand, and it functions, it's healed. So his work that they're trying to point out is very nitpicky. In fact, what they're going off of in the last passage where it says, but the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill him. Well, that's Exodus. The reason why is because of the context of Exodus 31:14. So we'll go there. Exodus, what did I just say? Find my notes. Exodus 31:14. Oh, this pollen is still making my voice crack a lot. So I'm sorry, it sounds so gravelly. 31:14. Observe the Sabbath because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it must be put to death. Whoever does any work on that day must be cut off from his people. Okay, so they're using this as their reason, their place to say, okay, we got to kill him because he's not obeying the law. The other one would be, for 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it must be put to death. Okay, so that is their context. That is why they can say, we're going to kill Jesus. Now, also, under the Roman occupation at the time, the Jews couldn't impose, they couldn't actually kill them, they couldn't carry it out. So that's why they would have to go through the right channels. You find ways to plot to get the Romans to be on their side, to find a reason to want to kill Jesus. So that's why all this plotting. They have to figure out how to convince the Romans to come on board with them in putting this man to death. So basically, the point of these sacrifices in verse 7, he's talking about here, the point of these sacrifices was to show mercy. Without the sacrifices, we're going back to the Levites' understanding, sorry. Without these sacrifices, the people would perish or they would be judged. So God was providing a way for them to live. And these priests were to share in that heart, and that's why they would sacrifice on the Sabbath. So was that work? Yeah, it was work, because they were having to kill and slaughter these animals in order to for these people to be protected, to not be judged. So it comes down to the heart of mercy, which is exactly what the Sabbath was to be. It was a time of mercy, a time of rest, a time of glorifying God, to put your focus on God and not on your daily drudgeries of trying to survive, but just resting in the Lord during that time. Also, when he healed this man, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around, I'm sorry, my thoughts are kind of all over the place, but last thought is, Jesus was not grinding medicine to make this man heal. He just simply spoke. So doing good deeds outrules the Sabbath rules. Whenever somebody's in need, you show mercy and compassion, and that's going to outrule the other stuff that's set in place, that the Pharisees had set in place. So we'll pick up tomorrow in verse 15.